And this is Beyond the Image. This lecture is a basic introduction to ideas of context and to what it means in relation to art and design. We hope in this short presentation to give you a better idea about some of the issues we will be discussing during CCS over the coming year. So we're going to start off with a quotation from John Berger's Ways of Seeing. When an image is presented as a work of art, the way people look at it is affected by a whole series of learned assumptions about it. Assumptions concerning beauty, truth, genius, form, civilization, status, and taste. For example, when you say something is beautiful, where do your assumptions and beauty come from? From what sources have you picked them up? Advertising, culture, television, family, society at large?
So at this point, make two lists. What you think is beautiful and what counts as genius. So these two lists can include objects, individuals, anything you like. So write it on your response notebook, please. So we may all have very specific ideas as to what beauty, genius, or truth might be. Some of us may have overlaps and similarities in the ways we define these ideas. The rest of us may have very wildly, vastly different ideas. So this is where it gets interesting. However, all of these terms, beauty, genius, taste, truth, etc., can be said to be socially and culturally constructed. Taste is not something necessarily natural. I mean, perhaps there is no such thing as the word natural, which we'll talk about in greater detail in CCS tutorials, but something cultural and produced. Similarly, beauty is an idea that is socially, culturally, historically contingent, meaning it is shaped by prevailing, current, dominant standards of the time. Beauty, like art, like many, many abstract words, shift, change, and are perceived quite differently in different cultures and in different time periods. The concept of genius, for example, which we might assume to mean a natural gift to create, could well be a talent developed thanks to privilege. So therefore, by interrogating our assumptions, we are asking ourselves if our ways of seeing is based on or perhaps limited by what we know. Okay, so the scope of CCS is quite wide. It ranges from fine art to photography, film, architecture, advertising, fashion, and new media. So CCS is concerned, of course, with this question: what is art? What is design? But also, you know, in looking and engaging critically with ways of seeing and practices of looking. Through examining aspects of culture that rely on visual images, a key concern of CCS is to develop visual literacy. We live in a very visual world. We are surrounded by increasingly sophisticated visual images. So how do we make sense of this? How do we understand what we see? Do we have a criteria by which visual objects, works, materials are valued, perceived, and interpreted? So in the face of such intense image saturation, how much of what we see do we really understand? What are images for? Do I make the image, or does the image make me? And to what extent are we active image makers with agency, or are we simply a product of images? So just a side note on the text Ways of Seeing by John Berger, which you guys will be reading for this term. It's a text written in 1972, and it consists of 7 numbered essays addressing a range of issues and themes, which we will also further elaborate on in this coming term. So 3 of these 7 essays, interestingly, are composed using only images. These are called photo essays. So in summary, the text raises very important questions on the hidden ideologies and messages in visual culture. Okay, so to follow up on this question, what is art? 2 further questions can be asked. How can it be understood, and how can it be explained? Perhaps a point that we can consider in thinking about how we interpret contemporary art is to think about the social, political, economic, philosophical circumstances of the work itself, surrounding the work. So contemporary art tackles diverse themes, ideas, issues ranging from gender sexuality, identity, to considerations of the environment, ecology, globalization, and the relationship of art to consumerism and popular culture, just to give you some examples. Contemporary art and visual culture is challenging as it is fascinating. Its forms and subjects are extremely varied, it can be provocative and confrontational, and its capacity to stimulate argument and discussion means that it can intrigue and frustrate you in equal measure. So in the words of art historian Ernst Gombrich, art may mean different things in different times and places. So basically in CCS, 2 key areas we'll be looking at will be definition and interpretation. How do we make sense, as I said before, of what it is that we see? How do we make meaning from what we see? So as participants of and possibly future contributors to visual culture, these are extremely important questions to consider. Do you want to add anything? I mean, do you want to
no, it's
just go through as we
yeah,
usually do. Okay. Okay, so moving on to the next slide, CCS. What is CCS? CCS stands for Contemporary Contextual Studies. And what is context? I mean, I think it's very, very important to define what this means at this point so that you guys will have a good understanding for the rest of this year. Take a look at the image on the right. We'll discuss it further later on in the lecture, but just take a look at it for now. And just jot down some notes on what it is that you see, describe it or whatever. Okay, so context consists of the factors, conditions that surround a person, place, object, situation, or image. Context can also very easily be explained by asking 6 questions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. Right, there we go. So when we think about contextualizing art, when we think about asking or trying to make sense or make meaning out of what we see, artworks in particular, how do we go about doing that, and what does that mean? So context is essentially defined, as we've already mentioned, by that which surrounds the image. So it is often this context that gives art its meaning. And just as the artist or designer creates something within a particular context, viewers, that would be you, of art or design, enter that work through a particular context.
So adding on, here are some questions that might be useful when it comes to interrogating images as well as interrogating yourself as a viewer of images. Who made this image, for what purpose, and for whom? So for example, was it commissioned by a wealthy merchant to an underprivileged artist? Was it made to communicate a particular political or religious ideology? Was it made for mass consumption by the public? Second, did the artist's gender, race, sexuality, or social status affect the reception of the work? Then, for example, was this piece of work made by an artist who was not recognized in her time because of her gender? Was it made by a person whose economic status granted them access to institutions and audiences? Has the individual's sexual orientation or gender identity contributed to or prevented her or him from mainstream success? Does the artist's gender, race, sexuality, or social status affect the reputation of the work now, or the reception of the work now, rather? So besides recognizing that factors like these have affected art and design in its past, it is important to recognize that they continue to do so, perhaps in different ways. What opportunities were practically available to the artist during his or her lifetime? So when we ask ourselves this question, what we are really asking is what sort of privileges allowed the artist or designer to pursue his or her career. Were they born into an economically stable situation? Did she or he have the privilege of an education? Were they living in a geographically strategic country? And last but not least, what were the prevailing social, cultural, or creative trends occurring during the time in which the image was made? And does the image fit into those trends or go against them? Secondly, I think as important as it is interrogating an image, it is important as well asking questions about yourself and the position from which you view the image. So you need to ask, what is unique about you, or rather you need to understand that what is unique about you as an art, design, and media student is that unlike the general public, you both create and consume images. So when thinking critically, you need to consider your assumptions both as a creator and a viewer. So you have to think about what are the learned assumptions you have that affect the way you view an image, and ask yourself whether your gender, race, sexuality, age, or social status affects the reception or your reception of the work, and how factors like technology, marketing, and education have affected the way you view the work, or the way you receive the work, or even the fact that you are able to receive the work.
Okay, so let's think about history. Let's consider history at this point. History of art, history of design. So very often when we think of art history, perhaps the first thing that would come to mind would be, your usual names, Picasso, Dali, etc., etc. So very often, right, it may perhaps at this point seem that art history is synonymous or is equated to Western art history. Of course, this is not the case. So this is on the right, a wonderful illustration done by art historian James Elkins, highlighting how problematic it is that art from these different parts of the world are being omitted as opposed to being included in this history of art. So there is no such thing as a definitive single history, art history, but rather histories of art that need to be taken into consideration. So a point to consider also would be that histories are always essentially an incomplete account of a much larger picture. And I suppose in thinking about, right, what counts as art, right, this might be a question that you might consider at this point, right? What counts as art history? So is art something that simply, is art because it's something displayed in a museum? Is it art because it was created by someone well known? Is it art because it's worth $50 million? So at this point, please ask yourself why certain objects are regarded as art and others are not. What is regarded as art, broadly speaking, is often a result of historical circumstances. So, for example, in the Renaissance, art was created for and seen in the context of religious devotion. Art today is perceived very, very differently, and of course there is a great deal of diversity in the way that art is made, seen, interpreted, and understood. Artists do not work in a vacuum today. Their work is a product of its time, influenced in varying degrees by historical, social, economic, philosophical contexts and circumstances. And furthermore, the close relationship between much contemporary art and fashion, celebrity, publicity, and business can influence both the creation and reception of works of art. So, in order, I guess, to teach yourself to understand contemporary art, contemporary visual culture, it's important not only to have a knowledge and understanding of its histories, contexts, and forms, but also to approach it with an open mind.
So just to reiterate, one thing we will be asking over the course of CCS repeatedly is why certain images and objects in art and design and media are accorded value, and why some are not. Are these famous images genuinely beautiful or valuable? Are they full of meaning or completely inane? Is their value rooted in their history, their aesthetics, or some other form of inherent value? I don't know. Okay, so we're going to break this down into four easy ways of looking at an image and analyzing an image. You can investigate meaning via a variety of contexts. For example, culture as context. What does that comprise? It comprises time, geography, language, community, political situations, and economic situations. These are just some, of course. This is a wide-ranging phenomena that extends far beyond this group of things. Material as context. So symbolic associations of materials used and the ways in which those materials have been used. Narrative as context. So the idea of art as story, the idea of artists reacting to culture, reaction of artist identity to culture, and the idea of personal versus collective memory. Site as context, the role of space in site-specific and non-site-specific art.
Okay, so first example, culture as context. So what do you see? So look at this image and ask yourself, okay, what do you see? Quickly write down your immediate impressions. Just take some time to write that down. So what do you see? How do you make sense of this image? Perhaps what we are seeing makes reference to her ethnicity, her gender, perhaps a religious belief. I could describe this image to you by saying that this is a black and white photograph of a woman whose face is covered in Arabic script or some sort of writing. She stares directly at the viewer with a gun, holding a gun. I could make some assumptions and say she looks pretty pissed off and is about to shoot you. So just make a list of your immediate impressions. Think about how you make sense and make meaning of this image without any context, without asking the very important questions of who, what, where, when, why, and how. Okay, done? So if I were to tell you that this is a work done by Shirin Neshat, who is an Iranian visual artist, photographer, and filmmaker, back in 1994, what would you have to say about that? So in the process of looking, very often we do have to interrogate our assumptions, as we have mentioned earlier in our lecture. And it is overly simplistic to quickly, see this image and assume XYZ points about who this person might be and what her intentions are. So consider the idea that the way we understand things is always in relation to our own discourses, assumed knowledge, and experience. So this artist, her work mainly explores gender issues in the Islamic world, particularly the various dimensions of women's experiences in contemporary Islamic society. Neshat explores the notion of femininity in relation to male authority and Islamic fundamentalism in her own home country. And the images are portraits of women that are overlaid by Persian calligraphy, and they refer to the contrast she experienced between the traditional society she was raised in and the modern society evolving after the Iranian Revolution. So this is actually a photograph. This is a work that was done in 1994. This series of work was done in the mid-90s. So in her art, even in her more recent work, she resists stereotypes of both women and as well as representations of Islam. Instead, her work explores all the complex social forces shaping contemporary Muslim women's identity, and the calligraphy is actually Persian poetry about themes such as exile, diaspora, identity, femininity, and martyrdom. Okay, next example. Again, do the same thing. Look at this image and take your time to write down your immediate impressions. What do you see? Describe it. Make any inference or assumptions about it if you must. So again, like the previous image, this is a work done by two performance artists named Guillermo Gomez Pina and Coco Fusco in 1992, whereby they locked themselves in a cage. And what for, you might ask? So this was, I guess you could say, a sort of social experiment to see how people would react upon seeing them in a public space, within this particular setting, whereby they are presenting themselves as Aboriginal inhabitants of an island that was overlooked by Columbus. So, as I mentioned before, their work was intended as a social experiment, a satirical commentary on the history of this practice of exhibiting human beings from Asia, Africa, and Latin America, in Europe and the United States from the 17th to the early 20th century. Google World Fairs to get a better idea of this. Okay, so the artists enacted rituals of authentic daily life, such as writing on a laptop, watching TV, making voodoo dolls, and pacing the cage in Converse high tops. Interested members of the audience could pay for dances, stories, and photographs. So unfortunately, among some of the audience responses included guilt, molestation, confusion, and letters as well to human rights groups. And interestingly, and I'm not sure whether it's shocking or not, that nearly half of the visitors that saw the cage in London, Madrid, Minneapolis, and Washington believed that these two individuals were real captives and genuine indigenous people from a far-flung land. So in an interview with Bomb magazine, the artist said that in all of the cities we have performed, there have been a range of responses from absolute tenderness and solidarity, people giving us presents, offerings, quietly being with us, sending us notes of sympathy, all the way to extremely violent responses. In London, a group of neo-Nazi skinheads tried to shake the cage. In Madrid, mischievous teenagers tried to burn me with cigarettes, while some handed me a beer bottle of urine. There were businessmen in Spain regressing to their childhoods, treating us as if we were monkeys, making gorilla sounds or racist hoots. So a question to ask ourselves here is, to what extent do we believe everything we see? So the record of their interactions with audiences in 4 countries dramatizes the dilemma of cross-cultural misunderstanding that we continue to live with today. This work is a powerful blend of comic fiction and poignant reflection on treating human beings as exotic curiosities.
Next, we'll move on to material as context. Another way of looking at art or design is looking at and examining its use of materials. For example, hair is symbolic of different things in different cultures and embodies a variety of meanings for different individuals. So, for example, in this piece, China-born Guwanda uses hair collected from more than 1 million people to create an imaginary international language showcasing the diversity of humanity. In one hair variation by Singaporean artist Lin Lu, Lu knots strands of her hair into a single 1,000-foot-long barrier that creates a boundary between viewer and object. In this case, the object is a bed and itself embodies a variety of possible meanings. In Janine Anthony's iconic Loving Care, the artist uses her long hair, a traditional sign of conventional femininity, as a tool to engender discourse about a woman's place in society.
Okay, next we'll look at history and narrative as context. So first question I'll ask you is, when do you think this painting was created? Is it a new current piece, contemporary piece, or something that was done maybe last century? Okay, so this image is considered to be one of the most controversial paintings in art history. Why, you might ask? This has nothing to do with the women's nudity. Nudity was, or female nudes were a very, very common theme in art history for as long as I can remember. But there was something else about this image that disturbed and unsettled viewers way back in 1865. Yes. Okay, so this painting was first exhibited in 1865, and shocking was the word that passed the lips of many who viewed this work. This work was condemned as being absolutely immoral, vulgar. There were signs put up to inform the viewers to not bring in women and children to see this because it was so terrible. Security guards were installed just outside the exhibit to prevent people from destroying this work. So why is it that visitors to this gallery in Paris, already supposedly quite familiar with art featuring the female nude, were so outraged with this work? Any guesses? Okay, so the objections to Olympia had more to do with the realism of the subject matter than the fact that the model was nude. What shocked audiences in 1865 was not, as I said, her nudity, but her confrontational gaze. French practice at the time suggested that women were to be modeled on historical, mythical, and biblical themes. Manet, who is the painter of this work, artist of this work, painted a woman of his time, but not necessarily the idealized woman, but a real woman, a woman that you might meet on the streets, a courtesan. Although middle and upper class gentlemen did frequent courtesans, they did not want to be confronted with one in an art gallery. Olympia, as a subject, right, as a character in this painting, stares out from her canvas at us, confronting us with her unwavering glance and all her flaws. And this meeting of the eye itself caused great outrage. And it was just simply seen to be absolutely brazen and improper. Okay, so that's a work that was created a big hoo-ha way back in 1865. Let's just look at this image, which is an appropriation of this 1865 work. Appropriation simply means to borrow elements of a previous work and somehow mix it up to make it your own. So this is a work done by Yasumasa Murimura at some point in the 90s, and like Manet's Olympia, which in a way looked at the tensions of gender and the politics of gender in the work, Morimura's work addresses the relationship of that as well, and addresses the relationship of looking versus being looked at. He adopts the self-portrait as a method of questioning the self and its relations. So the placement of Morimura as woman destabilizes the notion of fixed binary gender roles of male and female that is prevalent, you could say, in existing culture, and instead constructs a more elastic gender identity. So in this work, certain one-dimensional stereotypes of maleness and femaleness, masculinity and femininity are being subverted and questioned. So again, we could assume, lots of things just based on one viewing, on a superficial reading of these two images. But of course, you do need to do further research. You do need to kind of establish the context, ask further questions to really find out the layers of meaning that could be embedded within these two images.
And finally, we move on to sight as context. So when discussing issues of sight as context, we want to ask ourselves the following questions. Where was this work made? Where was it exhibited? Was it made for site-specific purposes? Has it moved from its original location? And this, of course, brings us back to our original image called Rabbit, created by artist group Gelatin and located on an Italian hillside. Located outdoors within vast amounts of space, the artist's intentions become clear when we examine its form, scale, the natural space in which it is located, the material with which it was made, and everything, its color, its form, its shape, and everything that surrounds it. Viewers are meant to discover the rabbit while wandering through the landscape. The experience is described as such in the group's artist statement. Behind the hill, as if knitted by giant grandmothers, lies this vast rabbit to make you feel as small as a daisy. Happy you feel as you climb up along its ears, almost falling into its cavernous mouth, to the belly summit and look over the pink woolen landscape of the rabbit's body. A country dropped from the sky. Ears and limbs sneaking into the distance, from its side flowing heart, liver, and intestines. Happily in love you step down the decaying corpse, through the wound, now small like a maggot, over woolen kidney and bowel. Happy you leave like the larva that gets its wings from the innocent carcass at the roadside. Such happiness is what made this rabbit. Soft, pink and fluffy, viewers feel compelled to climb the object. It is pleasant when sighted. But made of organic material and at the mercy of the weather, the rabbit will remain on site till 2015 and will eventually decompose much like a corpse. So what does this make the viewer? Well, it makes the viewer complicit in the decomposition. Having come into contact with the object, being made happy, we are the maggots and the larva that get its wings, quote unquote, get its wings from an innocent carcass at the roadside and are made happy.
Okay, so just to conclude our lecture, I guess you could say that art is not an empty vessel into which, the artist, him or herself, has poured singular meaning, but because it exists at different times, different places, and is often seen by different audiences, it does gather meaning. So this is your job to investigate and find out all the different layers of meanings and to make sense of it for your own self. So just to end our lecture, we'll be showing you guys this video whereby you can refer to the previous slides and the previous questions that have been asked and think about all these different issues in relation to what it is that you see here.
I was here about 4 years ago talking about the relationship of design and happiness, and at the very end of it I show the list under that title I learned very few things in addition since, but made a whole number of them into projects since. These are inflatable monkeys in every city in Scotland. Everybody always thinks they are right. They were combined in the media. Drugs are fun in the beginning, but become a drag later on. We're doing changing media. This is a projection that can see the viewer as the viewer walks by. You can't help but actually ripping that spider web apart. All of these things are pieces of graphic design. We do them for our clients. They are commissioned. I would never have the money to actually pay for the installment or pay for all the billboards or the production of these. So there's always a client attached to them. These are 65,000 coat hangers in a street that's lined with fashion stores. Worrying solves nothing. Money does not make me happy. Appeared first as double-page spreads in a magazine. The printer lost a file, didn't tell us. When the magazine actually, when I got the subscription, it was 12 following pages. It said, money does make me happy. And a friend of mine in Austria felt so sorry for me that he talked the largest casino owner in Linz in letting us wrap his building. So this is the big pedestrian zone in Linz, so it just says money, and if you look down the side street it says does not make me happy. We had a show, just came down last week in New York. We steamed up the windows permanently, and we had every hour we had a different designer come in and write these things that they've learned into the steam in the window. Everybody participated. There's Milton Glaser, Massimo Vignelli. Singapore was quite in discussion. This is a little spot that we filmed there that's to be displayed on the large jumbothrones in Singapore. And of course one that's dear to my heart because all of these sentiments, some banal, some a bit more profound, all originally had come out of my diary. And I do go often into the diary and check if I wanted to change something about the situation. If I see it for a long enough time, I actually do something about it. And the very last one is a billboard. This is our roof in New York, the roof of the studio. This is newsprint plus stencils that lie on the newsprint. We let that lie around in the sun. As you all know, newsprint yellows significantly in the sun. After a week we took the stencils and the leaves off, shipped the newsprint to Lisbon, to a very sunny spot. So on day one the billboard said, complaining is silly, either act or forget. 3 days later it faded, and a week later, no more complaining anywhere.